All right, 5 minutes after 9 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. I have a photograph I found, Joe, of my grandmother and my mother in this little town in Germany where my mother was born. And what they're showing is the house my mother was born in. There was no hospital.
The houses are still there. They built them back then.
Yeah. 1925. No hospital. So ladies back then, they just went into labor and gave birth, and that's the way it's pretty much been since the beginning of time until, medical doctors and et cetera started stepping into the picture. When my son was born 31 years ago. Were you ever in the room when any of your children were born?
All of them.
Yeah?
All of them.
Oh my gosh, it was everything.
I guess I was a male midwife, I guess you would call me.
Oh, were you really?
Well, I helped, quote unquote.
Wow.
Push, that's all I did.
I didn't do anything. I just stood there and went, oh my gosh, I hope everything's going to be okay. I was scared. I was filled with emotion. It was everything.
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Randi Hutter has written, Dr. Randi Hutter Epstein, I apologize for not saying her last name. She's written a book called Get Me Out. It's a history of childbirth from the Garden of Eden to the sperm bank and everything in between. So many things have changed. Some of them are, have a little bit of debate about it, controversy about him. Dr. Epstein is a physician, a medical journalist, a lecturer at Yale University, Joe. There you go.
I know where Yale is, yeah.
She's an adjunct professor at Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. She's a contributor to the London Bureau of the Associated Press, the New York Times, the Washington Post. In other words, she's got some really heavy credentials, and we're honored to have her on our little show. This is a fascinating book. I've never heard of a person writing a book about the history of childbirth before. It's called, once again, Get Me Out. And once again, her name, Dr. Randi Hutter Epstein. Good morning, doctor.
Good morning. Thanks for inviting me.
Where are you in New York right now?
I'm in New York City right now. Yeah, it's hot and sunny, and I guess people are waiting for the eclipse.
That's my birthplace is New York City. I was born in, Mount Sinai.
Oh, that's right on the other side of the park.
Yeah, right on the other side of the park. So how were you able to do research on this? And I kind of implied that a lot of the changes that we kind of take for granted took place in the last century. Is that accurate?
A lot of the changes. I mean, I go back to Eve, sort of, but, the first 1,000 years, not much changed. A lot changed, starting really in the 1880s, when we learned about germs and realized, yikes, a lot of women were dying in childbirth because we weren't washing our hands in between delivering babies and going to the morgue. Yeah, so that was a big change.
Yeah. Do we need to?
And then we moved...
What?
Do we need to? Yeah, I think it's a really good idea.
No, I don't mean do we need to wash our hands. I mean, no, I didn't mean that. I mean, do we need to help? In nature, animals don't have a husband helping. The female just has birth.
Right. Now, it's not really the husbands. I know that you had said you were in the birthing room helping, but, breathing and coaching isn't exactly the same as helping. I think you were probably both watching or maybe
I was
being
watching.
there.
Yeah.
Holding a hand, that's about it.
Yeah, they like to say the men are helping. They're kind of not doing that much. But, yeah,
we're not working at it. No.
Some women do need help. Not all. So there are women today, actually, that give birth at home with no doctor, no midwife. They think it's much more stress-free just to do it the way maybe their dog would do it or their cat, just giving birth on their own.
Yeah.
And babies are born, many of them, fine that way. But there is the rare and sometimes not so rare event that the mother or the baby needs help. It's not just the baby, but sometimes women start bleeding too much or the baby gets stuck coming out. So I think the reason why we do have doctors around or midwives around is to help in those situations when you do need, when the baby or the mom needs some medical care.
My son was born by, what do you call it, with the incision? What's that called again?
C-section?
C-section, thank you. I knew that all my life. I just drew a blank. And the reason I'm not married anymore to her, but the reason she had a C-section was because her first daughter, my stepdaughter, was breech. and they had to do a C-section. And the second child, they thought, well, we better do a C-section just in case that area is weakened from that first one. So
yeah, now we're realizing that's not so true.
Oh, really?
That you can, it makes sense, and so much of childbirth is kind of not always a scientific study, but what just seems right, and that does seem right. But women started pushing, literally saying, we want to do a vaginal delivery, even though we had a C-section, and it's been shown that you can. The actual medical jargon is called VBAC, vaginal birth after C-section.
Really?
There are a lot of women that do vaginal delivery.
I have a question. It is kind of religious in nature, but since you started with Eve, I wanted to ask you something. The people, I'm not a Bible scholar in any way, so I'm going to stumble over this, but there's a belief that the reason human females have pain in labor is something Eve did. Eve sinned or something, and that no other animals, no other female animals have pain during childbirth. Is that true? No other animals have pain?
Well, I looked into this, and I spoke to an anthropologist who's looked into these issues of how we give birth, because a lot of people are saying if we would just relax, babies would come out easily the way they do from dolphins or orangutans or other species. But, we're not shaped the same way. So as soon as there's a theory that two things are different, well, more than two things are different between humans and other species, but we'll focus on two. One is that unlike your dog or your cat, we stand upright on 2 feet, and so our hips are not as wide as animals that are on their all fours or hanging over like an orangutan. Also, our heads are bigger, are developed, so you have sort of physically, we're getting something bigger out of a smaller space. So it does seem to be more painful for humans. But, we haven't really interviewed dogs or cats. Or
well, that's true, too. But you don't see them screaming. It just seems like they almost go into a daze. I've seen dogs give birth. I mean, they just kind of zone out, and next thing you know, they're licking it all up. What about the umbilical cord? In nature, nobody cuts it. How come we cut it?
Animals do, actually. It's interesting when you look. Yeah, and different animals have different ways of giving birth. And it's interesting because some of the people that call themselves free birthers, who want to be alone at home and just giving birth with no extra people or paraphernalia, or maybe they're family members but no medical help, the feeling is that's doing it the way animals do it. But there are some animals that help each other. Elephants, for instance, are known to kind of get around and help the mom giving birth. I think it's baboons that the dad baboon actually sometimes acts like a forceps, suctioning the babies out.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah,
wow.
So animals have developed different strategies to help bring their offspring into the world.
Your statement earlier that if women were more relaxed, it would be a lot easier. Does that explain, and I don't even know if this is true, I'll say it as if it is, and if it's not, you can correct me, but does that explain, you hear about the ladies harvesting rice, and they just squat and have birth, and then they continue picking rice? Is that true?
There's so much myth about this, and there's so much racism and classism in all of this. I mean, there's a long history of doctors going back to the early 1900s saying, well, for the upper class women, it's more painful because they're more civilized, or because they don't walk around and they're more uptight and they have to stay in bed and relax for a month after giving birth. But your house cleaner, don't worry about it. She can give birth without having pain, and she'll get back to work the next day. So, a lot of this was, and even the stress thing, there is something with any kind of pain. If you cut yourself or do whatever, that if you're not anxious, it will hurt less. But all this stuff of pain-free and just relax, I don't know, there is something physically painful or uncomfortable or whatever you want to call it of having something large come out of a opening.
The book is called Get Me Out. It's a history of childbirth from the Garden of Eden to the sperm bank, and Dr. Randi Epstein is our guest and the author of that book. Do you talk about some of the things that are in the current news? For example, there was a story last week about Iceland pretty much eradicating Down syndrome, and the way they did it was by aborting babies that were identified as Down syndrome babies.
Yeah, I don't get into a lot of this in my book. I mean, I do get it, not that specific. This came out after, but I do talk a lot about choices we make now. I mean, in our country, we wouldn't have mandatory abortion when something is found prenatally, but there are so many tests offered now that give women the option. Mm-hmm. And we have been able to sort of decrease certain genetic diseases because of being able to look at the genetics before birth.
Yeah, there was a YouTube video I watched. It's probably been half a year or so, and the woman and the man were very heartbroken because they chose to abort their baby because it had the markings of a child that would be born with severe deformities. And then she got pregnant again, and she felt a lot better, and the second baby was born, and everything was fine. I don't know. I mean, I know it's controversial, so my question is not whether it is or not a good thing. I don't want to put you on the spot with that. But is it common? I mean, do you see a lot of this?
In terms of what? In terms of people making decisions?
Yeah, in our country, in other words, they get a diagnosis. Look, your baby's going to be born with severe deformities, and then they decide to just let the baby die or abort the baby.
There's decisions made. Usually it's not on ultrasound with sort of guesswork that the baby looked from. Usually now it's with genetics so that they can see more definitively whether a baby has a certain genetic defect, and then decisions are made. And, a lot of these decisions, which I think is better for the parents, are made within their own privacy. So I don't think people are publicizing, we decided to reduce this pregnancy, to abort this pregnancy. But yeah, those decisions are fairly common now in terms of whether people, and there are people that say, you know what, Down syndrome, this happened to my baby, and these kids grow up happy, and I'm going to go with it and have this baby. So it becomes... It's really complex. I think the more we know, the harder it is. Even the choice of whether to keep the baby or not, but whether to have the test in the first place.
I have a deceased cousin, and he knew he was going to die because he had cancer, and he had his sperm frozen with the intent that his wife would become pregnant at a later date after he died. I guess that's not so unusual these days. In the rest of her story was, she found somebody else, and she decided to get pregnant with her new husband, and that sperm, I guess, was, I don't know what they do with it after, if somebody says, never mind, I don't want it. But that, I mean, that's something you wouldn't have even heard about 100 years ago.
You wouldn't have even heard, well, you wouldn't have heard of it, but there were mumblings, interestingly, in medicine. I mean, one of the things I found when I was researching Get Me Out is everything that you think is new, then you do research and you're like, oh, wow, someone said this before. Now, you weren't freezing sperm 100 years ago. It wasn't possible. But I did find in 1867, a doctor wrote a book, and in it he said, in the future, we will be able to take sperm and help people who are having trouble getting pregnant, and we can just implant in a woman. It was considered disgusting and obscene. The British Medical Journal said we can't even review this book because of what he said.
Oh, really?
So those ideas are around. But yeah, people that, we think of sperm donation now in terms of people that are infertile or that are single, but it's also what freezing sperm when someone has cancer. There are people that survive cancer but worried that the chemotherapy might hurt their fertility or damage the sperm, so they're able to freeze sperm and then use it later on too.
Dr. Randi Epstein is our guest. We're going to take a little break, Doctor, and we'll be right back, though. The book is called Get Me Out. I did find it on Amazon, and if you're looking at the streaming video, I do have the cover of the book on the video, and this will be up as a podcast later on today, so you can share it with everybody. I want to make sure we ask the questions that our listeners are probably wondering about, and make sure we get the details of the book as much as we can in the context of a radio interview. We'll be right back.
The weather is brought to you by myfwc.com. Safe boating is no accident. Looks like we'll have a fair amount of clouds today, along with a thunderstorm in the afternoon hours, the high 88 to 92. Thunder showers will die down tonight, partly cloudy otherwise, low 72 to 81. Tomorrow, sunny to partly cloudy, with an afternoon thunderstorm, high of 89 to 92, and it looks like a couple thunderstorms Wednesday afternoon, high 88 to 92. From the Florida Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Maggie Johnson.
This is James Snyder, inviting you to join me each Sunday morning at 9:30 for Sunday Joy on 1370 AM, 96.3 FM.
If you or a loved one is suffering with knee, shoulder, neck, back pain, or tennis elbow and would like to learn how to get out of pain, go to Regenetic.com. Then listen in on the first and third Thursday at 10 a.m. to the people that give you the regenerative medical solutions to your pain. Regenetic, first and third Thursdays, 10 a.m. here on WOCA 96.3 FM, 1370 AM. The Source, Regenetic.com.
Langley Health Services, located at 7205 Southeast Merricamp Road in Ocala, is a federally qualified health center offering family practice, pediatrics, podiatry, dental, behavioral health, and radiology services. Most insurance accepted, sliding scale for those who qualify, and same-day appointments available until 4 p.m. with board-certified family practice and internal medicine physicians on staff. Langley Health Services, call today 352-680-7000.
What do I do now? After 911, don't worry, call Fakuri. Fakuri Medical and Chiropractic, treating auto injuries for over 32 years. Same-day appointments, immediate medical attention, all under one roof. Don't worry, call Fakuri. Go to bestinjurycare.com. All auto insurances are accepted. Available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to take your call. Car accident? Don't worry, call Fakuri. bestinjurycare.com.
All right, Dr. Randi Epstein is on the phone. She's written the book called Get Me Out, A History of Childbirth from the Garden of Eden to the Sperm Bank. Doctor, you have some really good reviews on Amazon, and I was reading one of them during the break. And it is interesting how you might be on to predicting what the future of childbirth will be just by exploring the past.
Well, I'm not great at predicting the future, but I do write about what's going on now. And it always seems mind-boggling what comes up next. In terms of, I look into egg freezing. I don't think I would have ever thought we could freeze an egg because they're a lot bigger and more complicated than sperm. But it is being done now. So I think, I talk about the future, but I don't know. If you ask me 100 years from now, I'm not sure I'll be able to predict that so well.
What changes has the science of hormone therapy brought to the women who are giving birth or wanting to become pregnant, maybe?
Well, it's funny. I was going to answer with the opposite, that one of the things hormone therapy has done is come up with a birth control pill. So that's in terms of not being pregnant. But yes, we've been able to also use hormones to help with a lot of the fertility treatments. So the more we understand basic biology of menstrual cycles, of fertility, of the hormones of pregnancy, the more we've been able to help many women who are infertile go through fertility treatment. I think one of the better things now for women going through fertility treatment is new research showing that they don't need as high doses of some of the hormone therapy that they did in the past, which means it's cheaper and fewer side effects. So if you go back to 25 years ago when we first started doing a lot of fertility treatment, we were really pumping up women with a lot of the drugs. It worked, but women felt pretty miserable, and they were paying a fortune for these drugs. And now there are studies to show you can get the same results, which means a baby to bring home with fewer drugs.
Joe was telling me one time that he went to a history thing when you saw some old tools used in dentistry.
Oh my!
And they looked very barbaric, right?
Sure.
Did the old tool? If we went to a history museum and saw the tools of childbirth, do they look barbaric like dental tools look?
Yes. When you look at the history of the forceps, It's pretty barbaric, and I would say probably scarier than those dental tools. Before,
Really?
because where they were being used. So,
Yeah, exactly,
In the
yes.
1500s and 1600s, the concept of forceps in the beginning really wasn't so much to help ease the baby out, but was when the baby was stuck, we had tools basically to break the baby into pieces and get it out so both the mom and the baby didn't die. You realize there's a good chance they'll both die, and we need to get this baby out.
Wow.
So the baby was taken out, but in kind of gruesome manners. Some of those early, what we call forceps, looked like some of the instruments that you have by your fireplace, those kind of
Yes.
Oh my
yes.
gosh.
Yes.
Yeah, they don't look gruesome, but when you kind of visualize what they were doing, then it's pretty gruesome.
Yeah, where they were being used. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So does the history of childbirth and even modern day childbirth, does it look the same across the world, all over the world, or are we less primitive or more primitive in some countries?
You know, it really varies in terms of. I mean, now it's pretty much the same. It's similar, but different societies had different cultures in terms of what foods they would recommend, what kind of birthing room people were giving birth in. So when you go back in time, I mean, even some of the Native Americans right here in America, they had some wonderful ideas about giving birth in terms of a birthing stool. And it makes more sense when you think about it to crouch down and have the baby come out during gravity. And there are some women in America now going back to those days of saying maybe that's a more comfortable way of giving birth. The reason why we lie on the bed on our backs, which isn't the easiest way for the baby to come out, really came about when doctors started delivering babies, and it was easier for them to help the baby come out if you were lying on a bed than if you were crouching over a stool and someone had to kind of crouch under you.
All right, let me ask you a question if I'll jump in here a little bit quickly. During childbirth, right at the tail end almost, when the mother, quote unquote, is in pain, and they give her the shot in the spinal cord. There's a name for it, and it eludes me at this time. But that shot is given. Now, with the influx of, for lack of words, marijuana, are they starting to use that instead of the shot in the back? Would that be more less painful for the mother and more relaxing?
You know, some women, it's the epidural, I think you're talking about,
That's
the
the
shot
word.
in the back.
Yes.
And it's interesting because some women really want it, and it doesn't knock you out the way the older drugs did, so you're experiencing childbirth and it numbs the pain. For some women, it's a great option. For other women, they don't want the shot in their back, and some women get a headache after the epidural. It's a side effect, and maybe they had it before, so they don't want it again this time. There probably are some women smoking weed during childbirth. It's probably not something that doctors are going to recommend. It's probably not something they're going to write a prescription for.
Yeah, we all don't live in California, right?
Or Colorado.
Or Colorado.
And it's not going to be the pain blocker that an epidural is. Maybe it'll relax you more. I'm not quite sure. I don't think we'll report it. So that's something that I have no idea how common it is, because I don't think any doctor is going to start reporting it and keeping track and doing any study.
Yes. Yeah.
Tina, doctor, one of the things I wanted to ask you real quickly before we run out of time is, as a doctor, everything is interesting and kind of over my head, to be honest with you. But looking at from an author's point of view, when you came up with the title "Get Me Out," that must have been an aha moment for you. That's a great title.
It was pretty simple. It got to the point, because that's what babies are trying to do. They're just like, good, like, get me out of here.
Get me out of here.
So, but it's not out of here. The book is just ended on get me out. The Spanish version is get me out of here, because they thought it sounded better in Spanish.
Oh, really? So it's in
Sácame de aquí.
Well, we do have a Spanish listening audience, so that's good to know.
Evacuate.
All right, Get Me Out is the book. Do you want to recommend a website? I found it on Amazon.
You can find it on Amazon, and for this week only, the Kindle or the ebook is $1.99.
Wow.
Cheaper than a cappuccino, or at least cheaper than a New York City cappuccino.
Yeah, exactly. Well, here too in Ocala, Florida. Dr. Randi Hutter Epstein, thank you so much for being on the air. What a fascinating topic, and I know that our listeners are excited about checking the book out. Thank you for being on the show with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. We will be right back.